Hello there. Now here we are getting ready in the video for the second discussion. We decided to discuss the concept of equality and what kind of equality Israelis, Jews, and I'll use the term Israelis, okay? Even though Israel, of course, has 20% of the population are Arabs, and there are Jews in the diaspora who are not Israelis, but I will use the term Israelis for convenience. So, what is our concept of equality? Israelis and Indians. What do we actually believe in when we say equality? If we believe in it, what are we actually talking about? What kind of equality do you believe in, and how should we reach it? That is the topic of the coming discussions. This will be a bit of a deep dive, so here we go. So we will discuss concepts like the religious roots of Western equality. As we will see briefly, the concepts of equality in the West were derived from the biblical tradition, from Torah and the prophets, the Israeli prophets, and again, the Jews had no kingdom in which to implement these and develop these ideas, and they were developed by Western political thinkers, Christians. But yes, the origins were biblical, as we will see. Versus aristocracy, yes, and even in the West, we know many people, deride Indians for the caste system. But of course, in the West also, traditionally, there was aristocracy. And as Mahatma Gandhi pointed out, that even today in England, where they don't speak about castes, they are firm believers in class, in discrimination along class lines. So even the concepts of, so we just have to discuss what we mean in the Western parlance when we talk about equality, and compare that to Indian society. Then here are some other concepts: equity versus equality. Now, equality versus equity. People mean different things when they say these concepts. I'll just explain what I mean. Equality is, in this context, is equality of equal opportunities, and equity is equal outcomes, equality of results. Communism, progressivism, etc., which basically aspire to equal results. Liberalism and meritocracy. Liberalism, again, this is a term which means many different things in different Western countries. I mean liberalism, the aspiration to freedom, that we will not impose any unnecessary restrictions on human behavior. That is what I mean. Liberalism, freedom. Meritocracy, meaning that men should be advanced in their careers and their in other words, the most talented should reach the top of the pyramid. That's what meritocracy means. And we'll see different ideas that run contrary to aristocracy. Like here, affirmative action. Affirmative action says that even though person A, B, or C did not get the best test score, we will allow him into university. We will allow him in place of people who got better scores because he is from a downtrodden population. He is black, he is Hispanic, he is a lower caste, etc. So we will see that. That is affirmative action. And socialism. Again, socialism, many people mean different things. I will say from the outright that I do not believe in socialism. I know socialism is central in Indian parlance and among many people in Israel. But, so socialism, again, socialism strives for equality, what I beforehand called a equity, or a light version of equity. Socialism is not communism, but yes, it believes that there should be some sort of equality of outcomes, and it's, again, different definitions, how you define it. And another thing that has to be taken into consideration is interest group power plays. In other words, what I'm referring to here is that there are different groups that speak in the name of equality or equity or fight against nobility or privilege, etc., but they are not to be taken. Their words are not to be taken at face value, because they are basically representing their own interests, their own interest groups. We know this, for instance, as Linda Fullman pointed out in her book. I think it's called the Compassion Caravan, about foreign aid workers. Many times they speak in the name of some indigenous population, but they are basically looking out for the interests of their own organization. Or one can point out organizations like Black Lives Matter in contemporary America, where many people will say that they are actually looking out for their own interests and not for the interests of the black community when they advocate policies like disbanding the police force, etc., radical policies that have already led to a rise in black homicide, etc. So yes, many times interest groups talk in the name of equality, but we have to be courageous enough not to take their words at face value. Okay, so let's go into the roots of Jewish and Judeo-Christian roots of Western equality. Now, the Bible, the Torah, again, the Torah is the first 5 books of the Bible. In the Jewish Bible, there are 24 books. The Christian Bible, they have more, what they call the New Testament, but Jews do not believe in that, so I will not be discussing that. So there is a war against nobility. This should be said immediately, and nobility is replaced by the universal value of human life. What the Bible calls Tselem Elohim, the image of God, that man is created in the image of God. Now, I will give a few examples just to explain this. What is the image of God? The image of God in Near Eastern cultures before Judaism, they believed that only the king was in the image of God. He was a god, the king was a god or a son of a god, and he was in the image of God, and the average man was not in the image of God. The average man was meant to be a slave. The average man was meant to be they didn't define it like that, but he was meant to serve the king. He was not in the image of God. Whereas Judaism, there is a recurrent theme in the Torah that all men are in the image of God. All men, their life is important, and not only, and the Torah will take this to more extreme formulations. Not only all righteous men, even evildoers are in the image of God. For instance, there is a biblical commandment that if a man is executed by the courts, we don't do this nowadays, but in ancient Israel, the courts, there was capital punishment, and after the man was executed, his body had to be hanged until sundown to show everyone what happens to wicked people. And the body had to be taken down at sunset, because and the Bible says, the Torah says, Ki kilelat Elohim talui, because it's kilelat Elohim talui. It is anathema to God, it is a curse upon God to see, in other words, to see such a thing. In other words, even a wicked man who the court had executed according to Jewish law, his image, his face is in the image of God. Even such a man, and therefore we cannot hang his body, just let it rot on a hanging pole. So there are entire multiple commandments in the Torah based on this theme of universal human life, that every man the life of every man is important, and they all have a divine spark, a divine element in them, even though, as we said, Jews do not believe that one may worship humans. And here's another verse here from Leviticus 25. That's the 3rd book of the Torah. Vaikra, it's called in Hebrew. They shall not be sold as chattel. That again, this particular verse is talking about Jews. In other words, there were again it's complicated. I won't go into it, but these are laws about a Jew who has an Israelite who has been sold into slavery. And it says that eventually you cannot. He has rights. He was not viewed as property. And eventually you have to free him in a set time. And it says, they shall not be sold as chattel. They are my slaves. They shall not. They are not your slaves, and they cannot be sold as chattel. In other words, humans are not to be viewed as property, and you cannot treat them as such. And therefore, again, this was part of the ideological foundation of the abolition of slavery. That Christians eventually abolished slavery in their countries. In the West, as we know, there are countries in the East, even in the subcontinent, in which slavery still exists, in Africa, other places. But yes, this was a war on slavery. It should also be pointed out, for instance, that whereas in Manu's laws, for instance, in the Manusmriti, there are different laws for different castes, whereas in Judaism, Jewish law, and this was, of course, common in all cultures prior to of the Middle East, of the ancient Near East. But in Jewish law, the law is the same for all castes. In other words, even though there was a priest class, etc., or a ruling class, but they did not have legal. The rule of law applied to everyone. The rules of the law applied to the king himself and to the priests also. Okay, so that is another interesting root of the concept of equality, the rule of law. For instance, everyone is equal before the law. Now, another thing here, the third theme I brought here, from priests, prophets, and kings to rabbis and representative rule. This I'm referring here to Jewish history. We know the first temple, we're talking about basically the time of the Torah and the time of the Bible, basically. The Bible ends with the beginning of the second temple. That would be the Persian Empire, Cyrus and Darius. But so back then there were priests. The elites were priests, which was a hereditary class. The Kohen and the Levi. These two, we are familiar with these Jewish last names, Kohen and Levi. They are basically the priest class, the descendants of the priest class in Judaism, and that was a hereditary from the descendants of the tribe of Levi. The ancient Israel had 12 tribes. This was one of them. And the Aaron HaKohen, Harun, what the Muslims call the priest, the high priest, they were his descendants. That was a hereditary post. And the kings also, the Davidianic kings, the kings from the house of David, that was a hereditary position. And the prophets, they were not hereditary. Anyone could be a prophet, but they were aristocracy. Jewish tradition points out that the prophets came from aristocracy. They were not just beggars who had a vision, etc. They were aristocracy. Whereas later in the Second Temple, we know the Second Temple, there was a corruption. One can read about this, even start from Wikipedia, but there was a corruption of the priest class, and there was a rebellion against the priest class, manned by people who we would call today the rabbis, what the Christians call the Pharisees. They were the rabbis. And the rabbis were democratic. In other words, they were rabbis who came from lower class backgrounds. They were working class. They were even poor, and they rose to prominence through merit, through their own excellence, and not through their hereditary their hereditary status. And representative rule. We know it wasn't only the religious leaders; it was also the statesmen who. Although originally they were scions of the house of David, but yes, there was representative rule in which each community, and when the Jews were in the exile, had their own community leaders, and it was not a hereditary position. And again, you could fire people, you could appoint them, etc. This is one of the reasons that political scientists point out that Jews transition so smoothly to democracy, because in their own communities in exile, Jews had a form of democratic leadership. Now, another theme I would point out, many people may not be aware of this if they are not familiar with Jewish mysticism, but the Kabbalistic concept of caste is very interesting. In other words, Kabbalah, the Jewish mysticism, has a concept of caste. In other words, the souls of men are all part of the spiritual body of Adam, of the first man, what the Hindus would call a Prajapati. And each man, as it is in the Vedas, each part of man, each soul of man, came from a different part of the body of Adam. But the interesting thing is that even though the Kabbalists believe this, and that there are souls that come from the head and souls from the heel, etc., but this did not translate into physical, into caste in this world. In other words, it was said that if you were a man who came from humble backgrounds, you came from a poor background, and you became a rabbi and you became a prominent leader, it would be said that your soul, that is proof that your soul was a lofty soul, that you were a very holy soul. But what Jewish tradition did not say is that you are proved to be a holy soul by dint of your caste. In other words, we did not say that only if you are a Brahmin or a Kohen, then you are a holy soul, and if you are a beggar, that is proof that you are a lower caste and you are not so holy. You are from you are a Shudra, etc. But so the caste was only seen as a spiritual thing, and we believed again, the culture believed in upward mobility. You could become. There was meritocratic upper mobility, where if you were talented, you could reach position of prominence, and caste did not, and the spiritual elements of caste did not hold you back. And of course, this also applies to the Kabbalistic doctrine of reincarnation, which yes, Jewish mysticism believes in reincarnation. For whoever's not familiar, also again, it was said that the place where you reincarnated, the social position into which you reincarnated, again, was not influenced by the caste. You could, if you were born a Brahmin, you could be reincarnated. You could be reincarnated in a family that were not Brahmins, and it was not going down the ladder, because the ladder was not social; it was spiritual, and it did not matter. The physical concept of caste, the societal concept of caste, did not matter. It was a spiritual notion only. Now, another concept again. Now, if we were to go from the classical culture all the way to contemporary politics, these are issues that must be asked on affirmative action. We know in India there is the greatest experiment anywhere in the world with affirmative action for the lower castes, OBCs, etc. So again, here I would just succinctly bring up the political considerations. when should we have affirmative action? When and where? When do we need such a thing? Because does it work long term? In other words, when is affirmative action necessary? When, in other words, in America, for instance, in America, many people do not believe in affirmative action. They believe in equal opportunities. In other words, Americans take it for granted that their culture has such upward mobility that if you are talented, black or Hispanic or whatever, you can make it to the top, and you do not need affirmative action. And therefore, affirmative action is basically bending the rules for one man or another. They believe in meritocracy. Thomas Sowell, the economist, is one of the most famous voices of this opinion. So when do we actually want affirmative action, and does it actually work? Again, it's if India has chosen affirmative action, how do you measure its success? In other words, I would imagine most people will say that we don't want affirmative action forever. In other words, we want basically discrimination. If we believe that discrimination against Dalits is not good, then basically we want it to end. We don't want to have to break the rules again and again and give. In other words, eventually, I would imagine most people will say that eventually we want an entrance exam to university just to be judged by the score on the test and not by what caste you are or caste you aren't. Okay, and another question, a very serious question: does affirmative action promote solidarity? And we would say that yes, we are showing solidarity by helping out the lower castes, or does it promote incompetence, corruption, and social strife? This is what the people who are the most firmly against affirmative action, that's what they would say, that you are basically promoting people who otherwise could never have. A man will get a medical diploma without actually being passing all the medical exams. Or become a pilot without actually passing all the flight exams, and that would be terrible, of course. It also promotes corruption because, therefore, again, if there is a way to break the rules, many people will try to break the rules. They will try to prove that they were lower. They will try to get in on the affirmative action laws. And social strife, yes, in which upper castes, Brahmins, or in America this would be Jews or Chinese, or Chinese will say that they are discriminated against. Well, nowadays, forget Jews. Jews was something else that was historical. Nowadays, Asians, Chinese, and maybe even Indians, I don't know, they are discriminated against in elite universities in America because the universities are only looking to take other classes, blacks and Hispanics, etc. So it promotes social. The critics will say that it promotes social strife, and it's pitting one segment of society against another. You're making a kind of a civil war here. Is affirmative active addiction? In other words, let's say you started it and it succeeded. How do you finish it? Because many people will not give up their privilege so fast. I mean, this is a real question also. Is complete meritocracy a realistic alternative? America believes, many people in America, again, in America it is also controversial. In America they had affirmative action for blacks in many states. After there was institutionalized discrimination. The logic went that there was institutionalized discrimination in which blacks were discriminated against by law, by American law, not only by culture. So therefore, they instituted affirmative action in which there was official discrimination in favor of blacks. So the opponents would say that no, this shouldn't have been good. That if a black was good enough to get into Harvard, he would get into Harvard just like the white man. So, but the question is it really so? Would the black really have gotten into Harvard, or would he have been discriminated against? So is complete meritocracy really an option? In America, even in America, it's disputed. And in India, of course, many more people favor affirmative action. And the question is, how could meritocracy really work? Could Dalits or OBCs, etc., actually get into positions of power without affirmative action? That is a real question. And it must be answered sincerely. Again, if you are actually trying to solve the problem, you must be able to speak sincerely about these topics. How can meritocracy be made politically viable? Like I said, I would imagine most people would not want affirmative action to last forever. Rather, they would want to get rid of discrimination altogether. And as I said, power plays, the weaponizing of equality, equity, and privilege. Like I said before, interest groups who speak in the name of equality, but they mean something. They are looking out for their own interests and not for the interests of equality. Okay, so where have we gotten? Okay, so now we have gotten to the next slide, and that's enough for now. Okay, bye bye.